Good evening, Democrats.
Good
Hello.
evening.
Woo.
Good
Evening,
evening.
Democrats.
Hey, Democrats.
Okay, so folks, thanks so much for joining our
Thanks for
special.
dinner.
Okay, now you can go back to mute. Okay, thanks everybody for joining our special meeting. We're really glad to have you here. We were here last week. We had our meeting. We had Betty Yee and Tony Thurmond who are running for governor with us. We'll be back next month for the big culmination of this airport project on June 25th. We'll be back to in-person and online format. We'll also be joined by another candidate running in the state Senate race, Brittany McKinley. Um, but before we get to our airport discussion tonight, I just wanted to make a quick plug because before that next meeting is going to be June 14th, which is unfortunately Donald Trump's birthday. And so he's throwing himself $100 million birthday party on the Washington Mall with military tanks and flyovers and all this crap. And thankfully, people of Indivisible and other organizations have put together the largest day of protests that we've had since he got back into office. And I've been talking to some of our other board members, and we all agreed that this is a really, really important protest to attend. If you haven't attended one, please consider on June 14th showing up. It's called No Kings Day. You can go to nokings.org to find some of the locations. One that doesn't show up on that site for some reason is in Santa Monica. It's Ocean Avenue and Santa Monica Boulevard from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. And I saw a Facebook group about it. So I'll put that in the chat in a few minutes so you can find it. But that's really all you need to know. Ocean Avenue and Santa Monica Boulevard, June 14th, 11 to 2. And this is just going to be, it's called No Kings. And this is the point I've been making consistently about this since he got into office. He's acting like a king. He thinks he's a king. This is the simplest, most direct message we can possibly give to people who don't follow local or national politics to say, this is not going to work out for us, folks. We have no kings in this country. The purpose of the founding of this country was because we don't believe in this type of governance. The only sovereign in the United States is we, the people. So we're going to show up and make our voices heard across the country. And these protests really do have an effect on how they are responding in the public and how Trump is acting and the things he's trying to get away with. So I wanted to just give an opportunity. I know Mike wanted to say something. If there's any other board members who wanted to jump in here and share your thoughts on it, just really quick. But Mike, why don't you take a minute to share your perspective on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think everybody here knows what's going on in this country. Um, from trying to cow law firms to trying to cow academic institutions to taking people off the street and sending them to paid for prisons in El Salvador and then ignoring the Supreme Court to uh, the cruelty that's going on. It's just all standard authoritarian building activity, and we have to stand up against that. And I think the protests up to now, that's not been as focused on something specific, but the timing of this one as a direct counterpoint to a military parade on Trump's birthday, which is classic fascist behavior. I was just watching on the History Channel today about Hitler's 1939 birthday celebration with a 5-hour military parade. It's here, right here in Santa Monica. We have 100 people on this um, Zoom tonight to talk about the airport, and the airport's really important. But all of us can take an hour to go from our homes here in Santa Monica to Ocean and Santa Monica Boulevard, if that's what it's going to be. And it's really important that people in America see that there really are, millions of people who do not believe in this. So that's why I feel it's really important. I'm going to be there, and I hope all of you will be there too.
Um,
Thank.
John, can I say something?
Yeah, of course.
Um, the March in Santa Monica is going to be great. It is sponsored by the um, Women's March, and it's going to be called Kick Out the Clowns and the Greatest Shit Show in Town. And they are really working hard on making it a great event. So I want to encourage everybody to go to that. That is on Ocean Avenue and Santa Monica Boulevard, like John said, and it starts at 11 o'clock. So I hope everybody can go there. It's very convenient for us from Santa Monica. So, and I echo everything that was just said. I mean, it's so important that we get out there and protest.
Thanks. And luckily, this one, the timing works out with my son's nap schedule, so he'll be able to come too, and it's right nearby. So he's going to be really excited. We'll make a sign for him. You know, he's 2.5, if you don't know, but he's going to be really excited. He's always asking to go to these protests, and they're always just at the wrong time of his nap schedule. Anyway, anyone else on the board wanted to jump in, or otherwise we'll just say, June 14th, we'll see you there. Please make sure you come by. Okay. So if you're not on the airport committee, we've already had a few meetings, committee meeting. That's where we're working, doing the rolled up our sleeves and discussed and debated and, you know, consider different positions on the airport. And now we finally, the big, Christmas morning came and Sasaki revealed their three scenarios, and we're so lucky to be here with Amber Rashane from the city, who's going to share with us, what these options are, what that means for the process, where we are, what the upcoming deadlines are going to be, all these things that we've been talking about as a committee. She knows the questions that we've been talking about for the past few months. She knows the questions that were submitted for this meeting. And then, so she's going to present the scenarios, answer a bunch of those questions as she goes, and then we'll see where we are after that, and we can ask some more questions. So I'm going to throw it over and thank you again so much for joining us again. We're glad to have back friend of the club, Amber Rashane.
Thank you so much for having me. I also have a number of our teammates with us. So I saw at least Heidi and Chris and Amelia on here. Tony and Peter are presenting at Urban Forest Task Force tonight. So they are not with us right now, although they may join later. So it's a full team. We're very honored and excited to be with you today. So let me make sure I can start the presentation and share the right screen. That one. There we go. Okay. I always forget between the different platforms where the share button is. I think I can share. Let's just go. Oh, there it is. Okay. Sharing. That guy. All right. Can you all see the screen?
Yep.
All right, let me see if that goes away on my side. You don't have a weird like pop-up in the middle, do you? I think it's just showing on my screen.
No,
so
we've got it. We got the title screen. We're good to go.
All right, here we go. All right, so tonight, thank you so much for your time. We are very excited to be here. We normally, when we go to boards and commissions, we try and keep the presentation to 15 to 20 minutes. Sometimes we go over. But tonight we thought we had a little bit more time and a longer format so we can dig in a little bit more into the different scenarios and how we got here and at least answer some of the questions that came through. And so we'll spend a little bit more time on the presentation. I'm not able to see the chat, so if someone can kind of monitor that for me, it would be great. And just we'll get underway. But I don't know if we want to save questions to the end so we can kind of hear all of it, but I leave that open to folks. So tonight we're going to go over a quick project overview. We'll spend a lot of time on the Phase 3A engagements. We'll talk about the 3 scenarios as well as next steps. So just in case none of you have not heard anything about this project, right? This is the airport site. It is in the southeastern corner of Santa Monica. You can see this purple line here, right? That is the demarcation between Santa Monica and Los Angeles. We actually have about 17 acres of this property that is in Los Angeles, and the remaining are in Santa Monica. The city of Santa Monica owns all 192 acres, or almost 192 acres. And we are, and everything that we'll be talking about is within this kind of outer black line tonight. And you'll see this a couple more times, so don't worry about it. But the reason for the project, we try and always start with what the project goals are, is that we are working towards closure. So December 31st, 2028 at midnight is the closure date for the Santa Monica Airport. There has been conversation around this. There's the consent decree that was signed in 2017, and then the ordinance Resolution 11026 was signed or was adopted by council, and that is where they made the decision to close the airport. And so that piece of the story is sort of settled, let's call it. We put in here, right, what we're trying to have, what is our goal for the project, right? Vibrant and safe, sustainable, resilient, mobile, culturally rich, ethnically diverse, and equitable to serve the needs of the entire community and to foster a thriving local economy. Our designated purpose specific for the goal is to figure out a preferred scenario for the conversion of the Santa Monica Airport centered on a great park after its closure at the end of 2028. There's been a lot of questions around Measure LC. And if any of you were able to join us for the January 28th City Council meeting, there is a really great memo from the city attorney as part of the staff report attachments. And so I just captured, it's not a great necessarily graphic, it's probably hard to read, but the whole graphic you can find on the city's website under the January 28th of this year staff report. And so what Measure LC says is that if all or part of the airport land permanently closes, right, so that's the first test. So when that happens for all or part, then Measure LC attaches or applies. And it is to all 192 acres that is within that black line that we talked about a little bit ago. And we can have new development for parks, public open space, and public recreation facilities, and then the maintenance and replacement of existing cultural, arts, and educational uses. It does say until the voters have approved limits. And so there's been a lot of questions, and we'll go through this as we're going through about what that means. So there's no use that's necessarily prohibited, but for uses that are not public open space and public recreation facilities, or existing and replacement of existing cultural, arts, or education uses, then you have to go back to the voters with a new ballot measure. And we'll talk about timing and all those things as it comes up, if that is where we end up. But that's the language. And you can look, yes, it's in the municipal code. It is section 640. And we'll sprinkle this throughout, but I wanted to at least set the stage with Measure LC and what it says and how we think about it, right? What constitutes as new development, what constitutes as maintenance and replacement, right? All of those sort of things. And again, the city attorney memo goes through a lot of that. So this project is a 5-phase project. We kicked off in the spring of 2024. Our first community engagement for phase 1 was May 19th. So it was almost exactly a year ago for phase 1. And that really kicked off the project with the community, where it was listening about what do people want, and what do they want to see? What do they, hopes and dreams and long-term vision planning and all of those things. And there was a series of pop-up events, and we'll go through that in a little bit. And then phase 2 was about sort of prioritizing and refining. Phase 3A is about figuring out the 3 scenarios and what does this look like? What does it mean? What is those parts and pieces? And then what should go forward into a preferred scenario? That's 3B. That'll be this fall. Then phase 4 is really about, once we kind of get our arms around a preferred scenario, what does that mean in more detail for incremental implementation, for phasing strategies and funding strategies, and we can get a little bit more real as well. So we started very broad, and we continue to kind of hone down or whittle down into phase 4. And then phase 5 is where we kind of codify everything about this project. So phase 1, I'm not going to go through a lot of the background, don't worry, but I am going to go through some. We had almost what we anticipate. We had over 200 people sign in, and we anticipate that about 400 people showed up in person for that very first event. We did a number of pop-up events. We had sign-in cards. Our project website, if you haven't been there, is really great. We launched 2 virtual education sessions. You can see them at any time on YouTube or click through from the website. And we had about 1,900 people take our survey in phase 1. And what that created was a list of about 147 different uses that were offered up as we would like to see. And from the 147, we kind of consolidated, light editing down to about 94. I don't expect you to be able to read this, but what you can see here is in the different colors, right? We started to put them kind of into buckets. So passive uses, active uses, what we were calling community hub for things that touched on a lot of community uses, and then arts and culture. And knowing that Measure LC, right, we were still at this stage really trying to understand what it meant, that anything with an asterisk either could or would require a vote under Measure LC. And so as we moved into phase 2, what we asked folks was, help us prioritize this. And that's this list that you see here. You can also find it on the website under the resources tab if you want to follow along or haven't seen it. But what you can see, right, is kind of the green and the orange are our recreation uses. The purple is that arts and culture use, and the cyan color is those community hub type things or type uses. And so even just visually, you can see how that patterns out. The top 10 land uses were park or park supporting. There were, we broke it out into, we've got 38 plus 25 on there. The top 15 land uses were all, would not require a ballot measure under Measure LC. For the 41 least liked, there was a variety of uses there. Golf was the number 1 least liked. Housing was the second least liked, but it was also number 39 as liked. So it was in the top 50, but we started to see housing come on sort of in a lighter voice, but come on, that there was still a significant preference for park, recreation, variety of types of recreation, but housing at least was entering the conversation, let's call it, and that'll become important in a little bit, but very much so that the predominance of support was around those park and park supporting uses. So as we moved into phase 2, the goal of phase 2 is really to come up with the guiding principles. So what were we going to use as we started to build 3 scenarios and be able to test ourselves? Do any of these reach the goals, right? So there are project goals that were set. There were the council priorities. There's the park conversion report from the 2010-2013 set of work that was done, as well as the Living Community Challenge, which sort of looks very sustainably at how do you live within the means of the site. And so we took all of that information based on the 2A survey and came up with a draft guiding principles. That's where we held this second community workshop. There were over 400 people that signed in. So we anticipate that about 800 people showed up to that one, right? It was at Memorial Park Gym over several hours. You can see that the project website got a lot of use. We launched another virtual education session. And then we had 2 surveys in this phase where we had almost 2,400 people complete survey 2A. And for those of you that did that survey, thank you so much. It was a long survey, but we were really trying to dig into where people's preferences were. And then 2B was really about the guiding principles themselves. And so again, on the project website, you can find all of the detail on all of these things. There's a whole section on the website about each one of these guiding principles, what they mean, how they might be employed on the project, and things like that. But, you know, the number one thing that we heard was to start with nature. We also heard a lot about inspiring wonder, right? Creating those spaces of respite and unexpectedness. All right. A lot of that goes into arts and culture as well. Balance economics is something that from the beginning of this project, the need to be self-sustaining has been discussed throughout. As we all know, right, budget session was last night. For those of you that were there or have been paying attention, the city's finances are very different than they were pre-pandemic. And so having this project balance itself, even from a number of years ago, and including that airport conversion report from more than a decade ago, all talked about being self-sufficient. And so that balance economics has become a critical piece for us. Amplifying versatility, this should be a place for everyone. And then celebrating place. Right. This has, as an airport, this has a long history in the city. It's been there for, in a variety of capacities for over 100 years, or about 100 years. It's been a source of inspiration and innovation within the city. And so we want to celebrate that history as well as, right, our pre-colonial history and the place and the region, and to make this feel very Santa Monica. And so this is what we brought to City Council at the January 28th meeting. That's where you see that up here, where they affirmed the guiding principles, directed staff to use them to move into phase 3, and use them to develop the 3 scenarios. And so what you see here, right, taking all of that information from phase 1 and phase 2, we developed 3A, which was the design layers. And again, for those that took that, thank you so much. We appreciate it. We did another virtual education session. And then from the design layers survey, that's where we created the draft scenarios. That big community event, I know some of you were there. Thank you so much for coming to that as well, was last Saturday. Not this past one, the one before. We are going to a number of boards and commissions. We'll talk about that as well. The 3B survey or COMAP, we'll talk about as well. There are a couple pop-up events coming up, and then City Council is anticipated for July 8th. So this is where we are right now with these draft scenarios. So quick recap on the 3A engagement. We are hoping to be at the Juneteenth pop-up event. We are also, you can see the boards and commissions down here that we are going to, and the dates of those. They're, generally around 7 p.m., but definitely check for times on that one. So we're going to about 10 in May and June. We also went to a number in April as well for that site design layers survey. And so all told in this phase, we're going to about 17 different meetings, including this one. And so thank you for having us. Virtual education session 4 really explained what the site design layers were, and we're going to go through those in just a sec. So that 3A or design layers, we had about 1,800 people, almost 2,000 complete responses, and then 3,100 have partial responses. So we had a total response rate of about 5,000 answers. We get a lot of questions about who took that survey, and we are continuing to see that in the top 10 zip codes cover all of the Santa Monica zip codes, as well as our adjacent neighbors. We are getting answers from a lot of different zip codes, but for the ones that are in the top 10, it really remains to be Santa Monica and our adjacent neighbors. And so we're happy to see that as well. We always ask folks about their age, and we've also started asking about ethnicity. You can kind of see how we're following the curve. This was something in phase 1 that we got 0 on the under 24 basically. And so we worked really hard in phase 2 to work with the Samo High Senior and others to reach out to our schools and to really bring that participation up. And we're happy to see that in this phase, we got a lot more participation from our youth, which is really great. We also ask, people don't have to fill it out, but if, you know, we do ask the question of what is your background or ethnicity? And we're starting to see a lot better representation here as well. We have all of the categories, demographic categories increased. Or let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the first 6. We saw increases across all of those. And so we were really excited about that as well, because we did a lot of outreach with our Native American population and our indigenous communities, as well as trying to get, working with our Virginia Avenue Park Advisory Board and focusing on 90404, which is our most diverse zip code. And we saw increases in all of those, which is really exciting. So the layers survey, and I'm not going to go through the detail on every single one of the layers. I'm just going to do an overview. Again, if you want the detail, it is all up on the project website under resources. But what we asked folks to do, because what we realized was, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention a critical piece about the council meeting. At the council meeting in January, they directed us to use the guiding principles, but also to have one option that would not require a vote under Measure LC, and one option, or not one option, they didn't say how many options, but to study housing. The pro-housing community, I'd say, came on, they showed up the day of the meeting. They started coming on, I would say, a little bit stronger in December, maybe January, and continued to be engaged with the project. And so I think because of the public comment that evening, council directed us to look at housing. And what we realized was this is really the first time in the project that we're studying housing of any type or location, and that housing is a really big question. There's a lot of things that go into it. And it was also a conversation that was not nearly as far along as our recreation and open space, active versus passive. Even the funding strategies conversation was further along because we knew we were going to have to find funding strategies. And so what we did was created this layer method. And so there are 6 layers, and the A option is always the least intense. The D option is always the most intense. And it was intentional that there are 4 of these. What we're trying to figure out is where community preferences were across a spectrum. And then we would create 3 scenarios from those and based on what we found. We asked folks to rank choice vote instead of just saying, what is your favorite, A, B, C, or D? We said, what order is your favorite of the different layers, all 6 layers and all 6 options. And so that's the results that we'll share and how we developed the 3 scenarios. So the first layer is connectivity and mobility. You can see there's a wide range, right, of keep the runway and honor that history in place. Do not provide any new connections across the site, right? That is an option, but that's our least intense. Again, and then D is show a lot of connections and a lot of connectivity to Ocean Park and Centinela/Bundy, right? Kind of changes there. And what does that look like? And then B and C are kind of in the middle. And so trying to help, asking the community to provide us that feedback to say, what order do you prefer these to be in? What you see is option B was for this layer, the most preferred. You can see we asked several questions for each of these layers. And what we're just showing tonight is really just the overall, but they're in each layer, there was maybe a little bit of movement on some of them, but not usually a whole ton. So you can see on this one, option B scored the highest. This yellow number is the actual score. And like it says at the bottom, if someone ranked option B second, it got 3 points. If they ranked option B first, it got 4 points. And so that's where this slider bar kind of tells you that option A got the most first ranking, but because option B had the most second ranking, right, for 3 points instead of 4, that's actually where option B scored higher. Oh my goodness. And this should actually be a 5, not a 6. I am so sorry about that. So it was close between B and A. I will change that, my bad. But this number is not 6165, it is 5165. So just know that. But so option B ranked highest or scored highest, right? And then you can see down to D. And there is strong preference in the community for prioritizing pedestrian and cyclist friendly design, and including accessibility of future open space and preserving the integrity of the space. So that was what we learned in connectivity and mobility. Water and topography, right? There are a lot of different ways to treat water on site. Water as a resource, water as recreation, water as infrastructure. And so we, again, created 4 very different ways of treating water on site. It could all be subterranean, where you don't see it, but water is solely infrastructure. Or it could be a giant water resource that can be a focus of recreation. And people, you know, whether it's, you can go on it for stand-up paddleboarding or kayaking or swan boats or whatever it is. But what that also does is as you dig out the space for these for the water infrastructure, the water recreation, you can then do some things with that topography. And so we asked those questions as well. And again, we're just showing the overall. So option C actually ranked or scored the highest on this one, then B, D, and then A. And there was a lot of comments around the ecological value, the aesthetic value, the recreational value, and making sure that practicality and sustainability were mentioned. And we'll go through in the different scenarios how we're asking another set of questions about these. Ecology and passive uses. Again, A is the least, D is the most, B was the preferred. So B, C, D, A. For this one, there was strong feedback about the ecology and passive uses, and they should be a defining aspect of the new park, and balancing those goals with practical implementation, and ensuring that it is equitable for all Santa Monicans. So those were, you were also, respondents to this survey were also could give comments on all of the options. And so again, there was a lot of feedback, and we're trying to give just a very high level summary. You can check that all out on the resources. So active park uses, right? Again, lots of ways of providing active use. What does that look like? What should be incorporated? How much? Is it a primary? Again, option B, A, C, and then D. And really the big flexion point here was the need for recreational spaces, active recreation spaces, as not compromising those passive recreation spaces, and that finding an appropriate balance of those two things was really what came through on this one. So the housing layer, same thing. A is a no vote option. There's no housing on the A option for this layer. And then D shows quite a bit of housing, because for the project team, we need to understand, right, there's so many pieces of housing. What type of housing? What are the income levels? Is it affordable? Is it market rate? Is it rent, or is it for owning? And that doesn't even get into how many dwelling units per acre, right? What is the maximum number of units that we could possibly allow? We are not there yet. Because this was a first time about talking about housing, we really kept it to just location, and then quantity of locations, not even quantity of units, because when you start to get into quantity of units, you've got to talk about what the mix is and who's their demographic, and what are we trying to prioritize, right? Small households, large households, seniors. So we asked some of these questions, but in the plan itself, all we're really asking about is, do we want no locations? Do we want one location? Do we want a couple locations? Do we want a lot of locations? And on this one, you see option A and then option B, C and then D. So not surprising. There were also some comments about or questions around well, how do we know that the completed responses versus partial responses and what that looks like? We did not see a whole lot of difference. We saw a whole lot more comments on the housing layer than any of the other layers. There are 650, something like that, across all of the ways that you comment per layer. But for the responses, they're right around that 2000 mark. And that's pretty consistent between the layers. As far as we can tell, right? That's the responses that we have. And so there weren't a lot of people clicking buttons, or at least it didn't seem that way, that didn't comment on all of the layers. There's a slight increase on this one, but it's really the comments where there are a big difference. And this, really focused on how do we fulfill housing needs, right? That's kind of the question before that council asked us, what is some housing? We had no idea going in to what some housing meant. And so this really helped us understand what that could mean. So option A was the no vote option, B was one, a few, and then many. But it is noted throughout that any future housing proposal would require a voter approval, right? And that's would be a ballot measure. And what the timing of that is, right, we'll get into a little bit later if this is something that moves forward with council, but this is what we'll be bringing forward to council. One other thing to note is, as I mentioned, on all of these layers, there were a series of questions, but where you like really highlighting where this division in the community is on one question, question 32, 47% of people said no housing on the site. And that means that 53% of people thought there could be some housing of some kind, right? And you can see how that ranks. But then on questions 33, 34, and 35, you had a range of 50% saying, I do not support housing on this site. And the difference between these questions, at least in the way that they were asked, is on 32, you could only pick one. And on 33, 34, and 35, you could say, I don't want housing. But then if there had to be housing, what did you want? So you could click as many buttons as you wanted. But this is where you see that this is really a polarizing issue, or a deeply divisive issue, and that we have really big feelings on both sides of I want housing or not housing. And so it will continue to be a question that we bring forward. And that's where we'll see as we get into the three scenarios. Layer 6, I'm almost done with this part, I promise. Was about revenue generating. So again, that self-sufficiency is really important. The financial picture is very different for Santa Monica. And so again, what does this look like? This does not mean, yes, these yellow areas are similar to what you saw on the housing layer, but it does not mean that housing is the only way to generate revenue, or that it even does, right? There are a lot of things that we still need to analyze. We are working very closely with our financial consultant to understand what housing means. There are some types of housing that will probably generate a lot of revenue, and there are some types of housing that are really important for our community that may not generate a lot of revenue. And so what is that balance? And what are the things that we get, right? Even between all four of these, if you look at this pie chart, right, the pink is the adaptive reuse on this one. So again, A is a no vote option, and you see a lot of pink, you see some green, and a lot of gray, right? But that green and gray is the recreation, right? We could, right, keep the runway the way that it is, and you could just ride your bike or your roller skates or whatever it is, all the way up to D, that has a very similar amount of green space. It's just we're allowing for more of the yellows and the pinks. The pink is smaller, the yellow is bigger. What this may get us, right, and these are all concepts, is with more revenue generating from non-park programs, or they could be park programs. Like, let's face it, that could be a Sky Zone. It could be, there are a lot of ways to generate revenue through recreation. And we got a number of those as part of the LOIs, sports complexes and tournaments and things like that. And so this really got to location and number of, but did not delve deeply into the types of hardcore revenue yet, right? Again, these layers were meant to spark conversation and to get people thinking about it so that we could delve in and do the research and analysis. So on this one, option B, and then option C, A, and then D. And there were some questions around Measure LC on this one about what. So again, A was the no vote option. The other ones, depending on what they are, they could or would require a vote under Measure LC. To know that. So in general, the takeaways, option B scored the highest across 4 of the 6 layers. We saw increased participation, which we were really excited about. We heard that there were problems with the Spanish translation for the layers survey. And so in the COMAP, we've created a whole separate Spanish link as well as English link so that that is not, should not be an issue going forward. And that housing continues to be a contentious issue and where we've got to find those frameworks. And so the 3 scenarios. So the scenarios are frameworks, right? One of the big things that we've heard from the community at the community event, as well as feedback that we've gotten over the last week to 10 days is, well, if these are the options, I have to choose one of these 3. And that is not actually what we are asking. These scenarios are not meant to say, I like option 1 better than option 2, better than option 3, or whatever it is. These are meant to invoke conversation about the parts and pieces that create each of these scenarios. No single one of these is a perfect scenario. They all have pluses and minuses. They all highlight different revenue strategies. They highlight different partners or funding sources or frameworks on how we might do something. And so we're really asking folks at this stage to tell us what are the parts and pieces that you support and what are the ones that you do not. And so you'll see the layers come back in and we've got graphics about what COMAP is, but we wanted to go through the actual scenarios first. So we took the layers and again, there's not a layer that shows here's every single option for, option B or all of the top ones to make one. We sprinkled them throughout, again, to try and get people to respond to what are the parts and pieces. But all of those show up somewhere between the 3 scenarios. As you note, right, when we heard that like D was a bottom, right, we didn't go as far as D was on any of the scenarios. Or if A, was pulled poorly, we didn't forget it completely. We just pulled back closer to what those center, what closer it went to. And so that was the intention. And you'll start to see, right, honoring the runway. How does this celebrate place? They all celebrate place a little differently. They all start with nature a little differently. They all balance economics a little differently. And so inspire wonder and amplify versatility. So they all tie back to the guiding principles and they are based on the community feedback that we heard in 1 and 2, as well as that council direction. And a lot of about this is trying to find what does some housing mean, because we haven't had any real conversations about this other than getting a direction. And so we're trying to explore this. So as we get to scenario 1, right, this is what we have today. It is 80% impervious. There's a lot of concrete, there's a lot of asphalt, there's a lot of buildings that some can be reused and some are not real great buildings. And we look at that runway and taxiways, as well as that north and south zone, because there are built things on this north zone, right? Some of these are hangars, some of these are office space. One of them is an FAA tower. How do we treat that? How do we treat the south zone, which is a lot of our artist community, has a lot of those rent spaces that support a diversity of businesses, and Barker Hangar is there as well. So it has a lot of different opportunities that we want to support in different ways and find out with the community, what does this look like? So scenario 1 is the reuse, restoration, and resilience. This one honors that runway. Is sort of this is the no vote option. We have gotten feedback that this option is boring, and we take that seriously. We did not think this was boring, other than the blue of the water is not as dynamic as you see in scenarios 2 and 3. So maybe that's why people think it's boring. But what this is doing right, is to say if we keep the runway and we keep that armature, right, this one is on purpose rectilinear, that the runway is rectilinear. It is more orthogonal. It is not all of those kind of curvilinear shapes that you see in some of the other ones. But it's intentional, right? Because we are celebrating what this airport has done over the last 100 years and honoring that. This west end is our connect with nature, right? This is a rewilding area, looking at biohabitats. How do we increase biodiversity, right? Right now, as an airport, birds are really bad. So therefore, bugs are really bad. And therefore, worms are really bad, right? Sort of as you go up the food chain, because bird strikes with airplanes are not good. Hopefully everyone can understand why. But once this airport closes to air traffic, we can rewild this. And you already see it a little bit for those that have either come to the community event or been to the observation deck at the airport admin building, or if you've even just looked over the fence, right? The wildflowers now are kind of gone. They've already peaked. But where we shortened the runway, you already see really beautiful flowers sprouting in the spring. And that's sort of a hint of what can be to come. And so this option looks at keeping this west end, which arguably is the best view, although there are really great views throughout the site. And I will just plug one more time, looking at the site opportunity and constraint or the site inventory that's on the project website. If you really want to dig in and understand the topography and where great views are and all those sorts of things, we have a ton of information on there to talk about. But this west end is the one that you get the best views of the ocean. Looking at how do we incorporate community gardens or community orchard or community farm, right? There's a lot of different scales and ways to do it. Keeping a piece of that runway so that we can really kind of reinforce that sense of place. Adaptively reusing the buildings, existing buildings on the south side, as well as on that north side. Some of these are hangars. A lot of them have aviation-based businesses that need a runway. So when that runway goes away, those spaces will be available. As well as a small amphitheater, right? You see a lot more surface parking in this one because there's not as much revenue generating, we don't believe. But this, let me qualify that before people start raising hands. The other thing to note is when we save all of these buildings and adaptively reuse them on the north and south side of the runway, the airport currently, because there's a lot of numbers that get thrown around, the airport for the non-aviation leases currently generates about $20 million, $18 to $20 million annually. And then you have to take out expenses, and those expenses are about 11 to 12. And so what we end up with is about $6 to $7 million that could go back into this project. That is something that council will have to consider, right? Once the airport fund goes away, that money goes to the general fund. But that's something that we're advocating for. And we've got a financial strategy to talk about that. And I'll go through that in just a sec. But I wanted to highlight that piece, that there is revenue currently on site, and we would expect that could go up as we are able to release places and spaces that currently are aviation based or runway based. As moving on, so one thing else to note about this blue water, this is something that in working with our water resources department and the variety of funding that comes along with that, right, is this a big reservoir? Like if you've been to Franklin Reservoir or Echo Park and Silver Lake and others around, right, where this is actually water infrastructure, helping us to be more resilient. It is also then constructed, operated, maintained by the Water Resources Department and a separate fund, right? So looking at this one, really what we're contemplating as a financial strategy is creating an enterprise fund where all of the on-site revenue remains dedicated for the function and development of the operations of this park, right? As it is, kind of today with the airport fund rules. Then over time, establishing the park to increase the adjacent property values and spur further redevelopment of surrounding areas, right? But really holding space of what this looks like existing. There was a lot of questions about Surplus Lands Act, and we'll get into those as well. But we are working diligently to understand what the state would make us do. And that the Surplus Lands Act would still apply to any development or lease moving forward, right? Any lease longer than 15 years counts as a disposition under the state rules. And if we were to sell anything or a lease longer than 15 years, again, not saying that we would do any of those things, but we are trying to understand from the SLA or with the rules of SLA, what that means. And Measure LC would remain in place. And there would not be any vote with this option. This option for funding strategies has a couple different things. As I mentioned, that revenue that's on site, but that's where on this east end, what you see is a sports complex, basically. And that would be a public-private partnership, right? That would be our intention for this one, where someone else is constructing these fields and courts. They operate, maintain, and program them, but that the city would have use of them in some capacity, right? That would be a use agreement potentially. And so taking recreation seriously as a revenue generator. And what does that mean? It means probably that the community members do not get access all the time, but there would be access and there would be more fields than we currently have today, fields and courts. And that it is a revenue generating strategy for this option. There could also be a general obligation bond. Right, looking at sustainability grants and park grants. Philanthropy, we would probably need to rely on pretty heavily on this one. And reducing costs by allocating space to others, right? So again, that's what this big water does in this option, is somebody else pays for that, but we get to keep it as a item that we can look at, walk around, recreate around, but not on, but it is water as infrastructure. Same with this one. And so it's, I don't want to say outsourcing, but finding partners who will pay for things because this option generates the least amount on site potentially, or that's our, assumption on this one. Again, as you look, if you came on Saturday, you can start to see what the site area is. You'll note as we go through this park, whether it's free park or leasable park or recreation on runway or other, the percentages of recreation on all three scenarios keep at least 2/3 of the space as park. And parks, a variety of types, right, between active, passive, and public-private partnerships. This one may be a longer scenario that takes us a longer time to realize, but that's okay, right? It has taken 100 years since it was an airport, so we do have some time, right? And we can look at it that way. You can see costs are probably lowest, and then we keep the other ones in there as a framework. So that's option one, and thank you for bearing with me, but we really wanted to spend some time going through what the thinking for each of these is. So again, for option two, weaving park and community, you can see right, that option B on the mobility and connectivity layer, as well as the water, which was option C, being played out here. And then looking at different areas, right? Always keeping the taxiways, runways, and a lot of the supporting spaces as park and park focused. Yes, this one is a lot more sinewy. It's a lot more bendy. It's got a lot more curves. And these were some of the things that we heard that really resonated for people. And that was very exciting. And we're hoping that through COMAP, people will continue to tell us what they like about the different parts and pieces. What this one does is it establishes this as a parks district, right? And as we add some revenue generating spaces, we can start to have some free recreational fields. So you'll see the difference here between free fields and courts versus a public-private partnership or a pay-to-play, right, where we're working with an operator. And that means we'd have reduced probably access, but someone else is paying for it. This one also relies heavily on big events. And so we've been talking to a lot of different folks that run parks and what are the different ways that they can generate revenue on site. And then what do they get for it? So one option, because we did hear in the top 50 uses, amphitheater, small and large. And those ranked in different ways, but they were both as part of the top 50 uses. And so what this amphitheater shows is that there could be the potential to have large events a couple times a year, because that then generates a significant amount of revenue and pays for free stuff or nice stuff that we want, right? We can pay for an adventure playground, or we could pay for some of those arts and cultural, sculptural walks and things of that sort. So is that a trade-off that we're interested in? And again, we're really hoping that through COMAP, people will start to tell us what parts and pieces they like or dislike. Thumbs up, thumbs down, we'll show that. This one has a smaller water body because underneath this portion that's in Los Angeles would be the water infrastructure, water plant, let's call it. And so they have some surface area, but underneath this really wonderful passive recreation area, we would have that water treatment system or water plant. And what this does is it's in Los Angeles. And for these 17 acres that are owned by the city of Santa Monica, but in the city of Los Angeles, as long as it's a municipal use, generally it's okay. Where their zoning does not apply to it, or we can work with them on it. So this looks at how do we use that space for a municipal need, right? In the other one, it was recreation. In this one, it's water infrastructure. And then giving back this whole eastern end, which has some really beautiful views to the mountains, to downtown, and to Century City. And it's the high point on the site, right? This is about 176 feet. And over on this western end, it's about 115 feet. So about 60 feet of fall, even though this presents as mostly flat, but it's over a mile long. Then on this option, we are showing some on this north side for either housing or more specific revenue generating uses, right? A lot of what Measure LC says, where it's existing or maintenance or replacement of existing arts, cultural, and educational facilities, is we can only change a building by less than half. And so let's pretend we wanted to put sound studios in there, or we wanted a futsal space, indoor space. Or I know the Petanque folks came out pretty strongly, and they were talking about an indoor or covered space, right? The existing buildings may not be correct. They may not be tall enough. They may not be wide enough. They may not have the right HVAC conditions, right? A lot of the buildings that are out there are, corrugated metal or other that are really just meant to provide some protection from the elements. And so we might need to change those, which would then push it into the category of new development. And again, if it's parks, recreation, or public open space, that's okay for quote unquote new development. And that is a planning term. Again, I'll point you back to that memo from the city attorney. And so this is exploring how can we create buildings that might support, yes, we're showing some housing, but also what are those public-private partnerships and what are those spaces? What should they look like? In this southern area, right, thinking about artists, live workspaces that would contribute to folks being here, but also strengthening that arts and cultural piece that is already at the airport and just augmenting it. And then we have with this big event space, right? As people come, they may want to stay over, right? So hotel is something that we suggested as we have these big events and spaces. Is that something we want to entertain or not? Again, really leaning on that COMAP for you all to give us feedback on that. And then having a transit center. So as we added one connection point across the site, and then one connecting out to National, if we're bringing people in and then we want people not to take their cars, how are we encouraging that and facilitating that mobility and transportation? And so the financial strategy for this one, as I mentioned, would be heavily on large events, a couple of times a year. We would also look into creating an independent parks district. It would probably absorb Clover Park. Looking at, right, we are exploring EIFDs or CRDs, the climate resilience districts, and what does that mean for as adjacent properties, tax revenues or property values go up, right? How is that funneled into the parks district? Can it be? What does that look like? Again, these are concepts of things that we're looking at. SLA has specific exemptions for park districts. And so that's one of the things that we're exploring with them is what does that mean? What are the ways that the triggers for SLA for a public agency are very low? And so what can we do to ensure that we can have a great park and what that means? This is also, as we have more revenue generating places and spaces, right? This is an option that we could probably do more affordable housing than certainly in A, because A is a no vote option, but where we have revenue generating to offset any costs related to, right? So trying to explore what does housing mean? Again, that some term, is it affordable housing? How do we balance that? What does that look like? Is it market rate? Because that will help balance. Is it something else? Are we really leaning into these park public-private partnerships and those sorts of things? And so there's a wide variety of funding streams on this one, right? There's a little bit more that we can do as we start to add other potentials for on-site revenue. And we gain some things and we lose some things. And that's where we're really looking for your feedback. Again, oops, did that go? Oh, there we go. So again, talking about timing, maybe this can happen a little sooner. Again, that green bar is very similar to what you saw in scenario 1 and the funding strategies as I just talked about. Then for scenario 3, and I promise I'm almost done, this one is growing park, growing community. So this one leans more heavily on housing as a strategy, as a human right. Again, trying to explore what does some housing mean and what do we get for it? Why would we even consider this? And this is, again, we want to be able to bring this data to City Council to say, we explored with the community a wide variety of topics, uses, locations, and here's what we heard from them. And that's where that COMAP will really help us. Again, the West End is really that nature place, right? We've got some larger event lawns where you could have cultural events, right? Where if Samuel High is having their graduation or other, right? I don't know if you've been to Barnum Hall in a while, but right, they're overgrowing that in a lot of ways. Or is this where some of our Santa Monica Fest and some of those things that we used to do, right? And Clover Park, where we've had some of those events, do we start to pull those types of things into this type of park? Water in this instance is really more about recreation. And so this could be, again, kayaking or stand-up paddleboarding or other things that let you use water as recreation. The water that we see at the ocean, which is amazing, provides a different type of recreation and experience, right? We're starting to see a small amphitheater here, other types of playgrounds and play experiences. We're still adding lots of courts and field spaces. These are then all free or run by the city, right? Because we have development agreements, or maybe they're, with the different levels of housing and or revenue generating. This one is also where you see the aquatic center, but it is a, beautifully built out, world-class, looking for, Olympic trials and things. We've heard a lot of people talk about those. It doesn't mean that we would not want an aquatic center in the final scenario. We are just showing different ways, right? Aquatic centers tend to be expensive, and if we can find a public-private partnership, great. But if we can't, this is an option where we could probably still afford that. And that might be something that we want to prioritize. Again, a transit hub so that we can get people out of their cars. By having some level of housing, does that help us with our trip generation? Does that help us in reducing traffic? Right, these are things that we want to understand better and to hear from the community what is tolerable and what is not tolerable. These are meant to push the conversation. So this leasing strategy or funding strategy, the city leases or sells development parcels out to create complete neighborhoods, right? Having great edges creates great parks. Having eyes on the parks and open spaces helps them be more enlivened. They feel more safe and secure, and all of those good benefits. Again, though, any type of housing would require a vote under Measure LC. This one relies on park impact fees, development agreements, and transportation grants, and working with different entities in the general fund, right? Because we have now created significant growth, at least in theory, right? Those revenues for the general fund would increase as well, and so that's kind of why you see these three scenarios so differently, and they don't go as far as the least liked in the layers, right? Even on this last one, we took out a big area of potential housing or revenue development area because there was no support for it, or it had the least support. So we did morph between what we heard in the layers survey and what you're seeing in these scenarios. So key takeaways from all three of these. They all preserve the runway and taxiways and supportive spaces. At least 2/3 is open space, recreation, or park space across all of them. And we generally keep any type of adaptive reuse or new buildings to that north and south, or on current asphalt spaces. We're trying to be flexible and show a lot of different ideas, and then relying on COMAP for the community engagement on this. So these were revealed on May 17th, right, about 10 days ago. A lot of people showed up. It was really great. There were bus tours inside the fence, which really got people out there and to understand, to be able to see what's going on and what this space looks like. And we had a number of folks show up, and you know what, I should have, I just lost how many people were there, but we had a great community event, and thank you to everyone that came out. So as you've heard me harping tonight, COMAP is what we would really love to understand. We have a English version. So this is on the website, right as you get to the home landing page. There's the English version and a Spanish version. So please share this widely. It closes June 22nd. And then also, if you want to spend time with the three scenarios, we created under the Learn and Engage tab is where you'll find all the PDFs. So everything that I just went through with all of the detail and the boards that were presented at the community event, you can find them under Learn and Engage. When you go to COMAP, this is what it looks like. So again, we're saying per layer. We'd love to hear a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and you can leave a comment. Or if you just want to tell us something, there's an other button as well. And you can comment on all three of the scenarios. It works on the phone as well as your computer. You can zoom way in so that you can really look at those details. And then the last slide almost, is what are we doing next, right? What are the next steps? So we did the layers survey in April. We came out with the three scenarios in May, and then the COMAP will be open through the middle of June, and then we go to council on July 8th. And again, we are not asking council, which scenario do you like best? All right, the whole point of phase 3A is to say, what are the parts and pieces? What are the components? What are the elements that we find support in the community, and which do we not find support or actively dislike? Right. And then we can bring all of that information, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 before them on July. And then they can make choices on what they want to see in a new hybrid preferred scenario that we will come back with in the fall and do another round of community engagement around that. So that is phase 3B. So there'll be a whole nother opportunity to provide feedback. We will also have a lot more detail on financial scenarios and timing and the incremental nature of implementation, as well as, right, in a lot of these, what you see is, right, the 0 to 5 year plan might be very similar between them. A lot of people asked about remediation, and we are actively trying to figure out what remediation might be needed so that we can plan for that now. and that we can be realistic on our timeframes. That airport has been there for 100 years. There was major manufacturing on what is generally the Santa Monica Business Park side, but we know that there are impacted soils and things. And so what does that look like? What does that remediation strategy mean? And where is it? So that we're not planning day one activities or activations on areas that need to be closed for remediation. There's also, a bunch of work that will need to be kind of saved off. And so, again, COMAP closes June 22nd. Council is July 28th. We are hopefully going to be at Juneteenth. If you want to come to that one, that's also June 14th. So after going to the No King's Day protest, Juneteenth is at Virginia Avenue Park from 2 o'clock to 7 p.m. So we're intending on being there. And again, we're going to 10 different boards and commissions, and we look forward to your comments. So thank you. I'll stop sharing. There we go.
Well, first of all, just tremendously, thank you so much for this presentation. I mean, the work that you and your team put into it and that Sasaki put into it, and just being able to take all of this feedback over the course of all the different steps of this process and put it into something that we can really look at and convert, our thoughts and expectations about what this should be into something to really, like you said, we have something to springboard off of and really start designing and getting into the nitty gritty of what the park space can look like. So thank you so much for presenting this also, and I think that we all appreciated it. So we're gonna start having questions from people, and for those who are here, we're going to be leaning towards the folks who are on our committee. So if you're not on the committee, if you could wait a little bit and we can get these questions in first. I wanted to start it off by asking about just one question about the choice to have two of the three options being housing oriented and one being the purely LC compliant version. Was there any thought or consideration towards making a version that was sort of in between as option two, where it was like LC adjacent, like it would be a park in spirit, but maybe there are some elements that you would have to go to the voters for? I mean, the one that I'm really excited about, and option three almost got there, but I don't think it was really what I was conceiving, is the amphitheater, and not to just have that park amphitheater that we saw on option two and option three, but like, you know, you could go as big as like a Greek theater scenario, or you could do something less impactful than that. But that would be a real revenue generation that could, pay for the whole thing. So was there any idea of maybe doing one that was totally based around, a revenue generator like a big amphitheater that you could have modestly large acts come to and make Santa Monica more of a tourist destination into the larger region, as a different option?
Sure. And that's where, right, trying to, I would say two, right, and a lot of things seems like, just from feedback that we're hearing, went too far. And that's okay, right? So, but something for people to react to. And so that's a great comment, right? I like this amphitheater idea, but this one is too big, right? What is that sweet spot, right? What is the Goldilocks between this one's too big, this one's too small, this feels just right? And so that's really the type of comments and questions that we were hoping to evoke from the three scenarios. Does that answer it?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to start going through. I'm going in order of hands going up, so we'll start with Patricia Hoffman.
Hi, Amber. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have gone to the site a couple of times and I cannot find the layers, and I cannot find a lot of the the charts that you put up today. And I would really like to be able to look at them and understand them. And I just can't do it from the screen. Could you please is there any place where there's everything you just went through is in order, and I could just go there and click on the ones I want to read.
Do you mean, would it be helpful to have kind of FAQs, let's call it, that is a bullet
No.
point and send you the links? Or do you want like the PDF of the presentation?
I would love a PDF of the presentation.
I think we can do that.
Okay, and if you
Yeah.
send it to John or the club, he can share it to that extent. FAQs would be really nice too. It would be great to have all of the information and all of the pictures in one place.
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, this is basically the presentation that we're giving at the boards and commissions. So what we'll probably do is post it on the website, and then I can send a link to say, here's where it is.
That would be fabulous.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Mike Soloff.
Thanks for the presentation, Amber, and thanks for giving us the hour-long version and not the 15 minutes. It was very helpful for what we're trying to do. My question was just this. You're going to council on the 8th, and you want them to give direction on after they hear what the community says about elements for a preferred scenario. It's my understanding that the EIR process requires at least one other scenario and oftentimes has two other scenarios. Is that going to be part of the discussion as you see it on July 8th? What should the other scenarios look like, or do you see that as happening at some other point?
I think once we get to that preferred scenario and people can see it is probably more when that conversation will come in. I could imagine like we have to study a range of options. Alternatives is the word they use as part of CEQA and the EIR. And so we will absolutely have to do that, right? And there's always maybe too strong, but in the ones that I've been a part of, there's always the do nothing, right? So there's keep it as whatever it currently is. And then there's the project, and that's what our preferred scenario would be. And then we study a reasonable range of alternatives. And that is where, once we know what council wants us to study as a preferred scenario, then we can start to banter about what should be those alternatives. And so there certainly could be, we want to look at options that do not require a vote, and that we will study those alternatives in the EIR so that we're covered, knowing that things may change, because we anticipate that EIR and CEQA process will take at least 2 years, right? Could be as little as 1 year, but it's probably 2. And so we want to be mindful and do this once, right, and get it right. But until we know what that preferred scenario looks like, it's a little hard to say what those alternatives would be.
And just to follow up, it's also my understanding that ultimately, whatever scenarios are studied, once the study is done, the council will have the power to adopt any of them or some, as opposed to, any of the ones that are studied, whether it's called the preferred or the project scenario or not. Is that correct? And if you don't know the answer to that, because it's a technical question, that's perfectly fine. But if you do, I'd be interested.
Yeah, that's one where like my understanding is one thing, but I don't want to say it if it's wrong.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure.
I know there are many other people who have questions, so I'll yield the floor.
Okay, let's go to Vivian.
Thank you, Amber, for your presentation. It's really complex, very complex, and it shows a lot of work and time put into it. I had a question related to your reference to the city attorney's report that was released at the January 28th meeting. Because in addition to talking about the Surplus Land Act and how it might apply to the airport, he also talked about the RHNA goals, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment goals, and that it said, he basically said that the inability of our city to meet the required affordability construction of affordable units, which we now are only at 27% of the round 6 requirements. That LC would have no limiting impact on the city's ability to build housing. And if we haven't met, build housing on the airport land. And I wonder if if your department has looked into that issue, because his report suggested that LC is really not the only determining factor on the city's ability to use this land. So I was just wondering if you've addressed that or looked at that issue, because we're coming up with another cycle of RENA goals starting in 2028. And if we haven't met the previous goals from round 6, we're going to have a lot more required housing units and affordable units that have to be developed in Santa Monica. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So we are working closely with our planning department or division, as well as our housing division, right? So in Housing and Human Services, to really understand what that means. And as we understand it today, right? And again, things change, is that when the RENA numbers come out, and we don't know what that number will be, but we assume it will be some, that as long as the city as an entity shows where those units can go, the state doesn't care for RENA. That as long as we meet the goals and targets, and there's a lot of different ways to do that, but there's nothing that says it has to be at the airport. I think where you're headed is that if we as a city, and that's where SLA comes in, right? SLA is different than RENA. RENA doesn't care where the unit goes. They just give you the number. SLA cares if you're a public agency and you're disposing of a property, that's their word, not mine, right? And there's a lot of feelings around that word that I've heard at, a lot of the council meetings as we talk about these properties, is that a disposition is if the city sells the land or a lease longer than 15 years. And so if what comes out of this process is to not do any of those things, then Measure LC absolutely applies. But if we were going to go into a lease longer than 15 years or sell any of it, then SLA would, I don't want to use his name, but I don't know what a better word than Trump's Measure LC, especially from earlier in our conversation. Overrides, maybe that's a better word. And so knowing that is where we are trying to work with HCD about SLA and that group to understand what they think about, right? There are there are additional opportunities with, right, 30 by 30 or doing a regional parks district or working within a variety of different exemptions within SLA. But this is a big piece of land. And so how does the state, right? We have started conversations so that we can understand how they would review this project and what they would make us do. We do not have answers by any means yet, but we've had we have had a conversation to really dig into this subject, and we will continue to have conversations because we really want to deeply understand what is possible and what is not possible, and when does local ballot measures or ordinances or municipal or right, all of those things, how does the state view those? So we are still working on that.
So I'm just curious, are you talking about just the Surplus Land Act, or are you also talking at state about the RENA goals? Because if we haven't achieved our RENA goals from a previous round, I don't think they're going to look very highly at us promising, rezoning for housing that never gets built.
We are working closely with the planning team, but that is not something that we are working on. We work with them to understand what they are hearing, seeing, and planning for, but that's not what this team is focused on. We just want to understand what the state, how they would review things at this point. We keep tabs on, and we are working with the planning team to hear what they hear, but that's not an issue that we are specifically working on.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, let's go to Chris.
Hi. Again, like everyone, I really appreciate the substantive presentation. So thank you, Amber and the team. I want to go to follow up a little bit on the ordinances locally. Our sustainability rights ordinance is fundamental. That it would characterize hypothetically anything done at that park as needing to fit that. Infrastructure, housing, anything. So one could consider even, and right now I'm not a supporter of housing there. One could consider if there were that, it would need to meet the measures completely of sustainability, et cetera, not tamper with the watershed, et cetera. And right now, there's no infrastructure there. So I'm confused as to, I have two parts of this. I'm confused, given that context, why we didn't talk in scenario one about the climate resilient fund, or rather climate resilient zone, our park district, et cetera. And maybe you just didn't want to emphasize it there, but it could be applied. So I need you to help us know that could be applied. Two, the Sustainability Rights Ordinance should actually be a part of the resources on the SMAC project website, please, so people will keep that in mind. And three, why would the park take such a longer time than the scenario three, for instance, that would require a complete outfitting of infrastructure that doesn't even exist there?
It is revenue based, right? So let me take a couple of your questions. So I think there's certainly, right, there can be a link to the Rights of Nature Ordinance. I don't see an issue with that. For the climate resiliency district, or CRD, maybe I only mentioned it in two, but that's something that's one of those things that we're trying to actively work on and understand what that means, right? But a lot of those increment financing, you have to have something that you increment above, right? So there's where is your zero line, right? And there's some very technical ways of figuring that out, and that's where, working with our financial consultant, we are trying to still figure out exactly what those mean. We're starting to hone in on, and that's something that, in going to council, we expect to have a lot more information, and then certainly by the fall we should have a lot more detailed information, because it'll be on one scenario instead of trying to do it for three. So there's sort of, again, we're trying to funnel down into more and more specific information. I hope that answers it. But then you asked me the third question.
Time. I asked
the
you
time.
about the
Okay,
time.
thank you. Right, these are all guesses, estimations. But the idea that if there are not significant on-site revenue generating sources, that things may take longer. And are we okay with that? Right, there's a lot of reason to do it that way. But it's, again, a timing thing. And you're right, there's a lot of infrastructure that is not there, right? That whole northeast corner has basically nothing in it. I mean, I don't think it even has power, really. And so there is a lot of earthwork that would need to happen. That would also, as you do bigger dollar value things, they take longer to finance, right? So there's definitely some push and pull there, but it was really just a concept to say things may take longer and things may be shorter. But there are by no means like specific dates or plans, or, we're not even saying how long something would take. It's just a stopwatch to say this might be longer and this might be shorter at this stage. But we'll continue to work to provide that information as we go into 3B and certainly in 4, so that we can be more specific on that.
And as you look at housing, could you indeed factor in what kind of housing would have to meet all of our sustainability? Water neutrality, all electric, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah. I mean, we of Santa Monica have prided ourselves, and we've been at the forefront of sustainability for more than 30 years, right? I don't see us backtracking on that. And that living community challenge, right? That deep sustainability of being self-sufficient from energy, water, right? If you've been to City Hall East, that is a living building that generates its own energy and water, right? These are the core tenets of what this project was founded on 2 years ago. Well, it was more than that, but specifically 2 years ago, when council said, go forward and do this, that was one of the goals. And so those would absolutely be important to include.
Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, let's go to Jeremy.
Thanks, John. Hi, Amber.
Hi.
You've earned yourself a drink.
Of water, mostly, but
I have a couple questions that are short, so I'll just do them one at a time. Is there any risk of the airport not closing?
Council has been very clear about voting to close the airport. The consent decree is in federal court, or it's a federal court agreement, and so that has been decided. So the feds will allow us. Our local government has made very specific resolutions, ordinances to say, yes, this will close. They've even given a date and a time to do so. So on one hand, yes, the airport is going to close. On the other hand, we've got 3 years before that.
Yeah.
Lots of things can change. So I understand people's concern about with the airport close. In my mind, yes, the airport is closing. Council has did it. It is part of the adopted resolutions and the method of going forward. But we've got 3 years. So can I say 100%? No, I can't say anything 100%, but is every indication? Yes.
If you had to
Say
throw a
again.
number probabilistically, just because you're
Oh
close.
God. I mean, I
Yeah,
guess
no.
I'd say
All right,
90%,
Yeah.
95%. Like,
All right, all right.
it's very significant.
Yeah, good. Because it's been a common question in this group of like, is like the risk of sort of like changing any horse midstream of like, does that upend the closure or not? Okay. Second question is, if there were to be a vote on LC, when do you think that would happen?
So it really depends. If we include uses that would require a vote, could or would. I mean, at some point we'll know what would, because we'll have more information about the specifics of what we're looking at. So there could be a vote in 26. That doesn't seem like a great idea. We wouldn't have CEQA on it. Like there's a lot of reasons to not do that. It could be in 2028. Right as we have already voted for closure, we've notified the FAA, we've notified the FAA and done all the check boxes that we need to actually close that are kind of more a formality. But it's still before the airport actually closes. And it could be after that, right? It could be 2030, it could be 2040 or 50 or whatever it is, right? Whenever we get past sort of those first initial years while we are building funding, building programming, so all of the ways to then, build that full vision, it could be after that, right? And I've heard a lot from the community about the fear about the airport not closing, and that can we please just close it and then we'll think about things. And so there may be a real reason to do it in 2030 instead, because then it will have definitely closed. But there's a lot of options, and those are things that will definitely be bringing up or for council consideration as they are making choices and decisions. And it may become more real when there's actually a preferred scenario where we're having conversations about. So we don't really know, but there are a lot of options.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks. And then the last question is, obviously, I'm pro park plus housing. But just in the spirit of wanting to understand the bookends of sort of what the scale of this project is, like, I would love, like, if HRA could, we've thrown around the notion of highest and best use in this conversation quite a bit. And just as a bookend, like if I were to say, what is the maximum conceivable value of this land? If HRA were to study, if there were no rules and you would invite anybody to come in and they could pay whatever they wanted for the land, I'm just interested to know what it would be.
That is not currently part of their scope for this project. That is a very big undertaking. That is not a small fee and or scope of work. So we don't have that currently. I will say through these 3 options, right, there's also balancing of what can the community withstand or support, right? Because of Measure LC and other things, like we can't just go whole hog. So that's where in these 3 scenarios, we're trying to find where that bookend is, right? Where did we go too far and where do we need to come back to so that HRNA can do analysis on a reasonable scenario, let's call it.
All right, fair enough. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, let's go to Sylvie.
All right. Hi, Amber. Thank you for your presentation. I want to preface my question by saying I am deeply concerned about our environmental situation in Southern California, and I am a pro-housing advocate. my sense of it is that given everything that has been shown, first of all, the lack of parks and the lack of green places in Santa Monica being so incredibly drastic compared to any other city around the country. The fact that, of course, we're experiencing a huge climate crisis. And some of you might have heard the news that there's a report that came out that the Amazon is burning faster than it ever has. And we're already over the tipping point by 6%. At a local level, the park is the only, like the airport land is the only situation we have to actually regenerate the land at a local level. The fact that it's been voted that number one from the community is start with nature, and number two is inspire wonder. In addition to that, the fact that there, in terms of housing, there are so many different locations where we can pour concrete over concrete and not concrete over an ecosystem or over the ocean. And in addition, the fact that the beach will be reduced. I mean, there's no question that the water levels are rising. And where I used to live in Miami Beach, we actually lost the beach. The beach is almost gone. And so I've seen with my own eyes what's going to happen to the beach in Santa Monica. So with all of these considerations, and plus the fact that the Tongva and the Gabrielino peoples have been stewarding this land for somewhere between 6,000 to 9,000 years, right? So multiply what we've done in terms of the colonial times. I'm really, first of all, I'm kind of surprised that 2 out of the 3 scenarios include any kind of concrete buildings, whether it's housing or anything else. But also the question is, have your team, anybody brought the Tongva and Gabrielino nation to have conversations about how they can be involved in stewarding this land and perhaps trying to be more truthful to what the vision has been for the community, which in big numbers, and you said it today, things like predominant support was park use, going back to pre-colonial history, and on and on. And so I'm curious to know if the community seems to be in big numbers really wanting to have a regenerative, beautiful, wonder-filled, and wildlife regenerated park. Why is it that the scenarios are mostly 2 out of 3 scenarios are showing land that's being developed?
Well, thank you for the question. So one, we are working with a number of, or we've started to build relationships with a number of our Indigenous communities. And we are seeking and working on meaningful relationships to understand from their perspective, right? What has worked over, as you said, 6,000 to 9,000 years. And it's why on this latest survey, the 3A, we saw a pretty good jump, right? It's a small percentage, but of the percentage, right? It's a small number, but it's a big percentage when you look at how few we had before. So we are starting to make meaningful inroads. And so we're really excited about that. And we'll obviously continue to do that, working with the DEI team as well at the city, so that we can understand meaningfully their interpretation and feedback and counsel. As for why 2 of them have I don't even want to say it's more concrete. It actually is. I think I should have had this number, but I think at most, it was in maybe the meeting invite, it was 40 acres of development and or housing or buildings, as you're calling it. Right, but those are all on what is existing buildings. So either that space was going to be adaptively reused as buildings, or is this new development buildings? Right, there's not one of the scenarios that envisions taking down all of the buildings and making this all a nature preserve, right? All 192 acres, because we can't pay for it, right? We at least need those buildings to be adaptively reused so that we can continue with that revenue source of the existing leases and real estate.
Forgive me if I
spaces.
misspoke. I didn't mean to say that the whole land was going to be taken by
I
buildings.
just want to make sure I was like, oh, we didn't do that.
Buildings will be built on the land when it is envisioned to be a real park and to improve the percentage and the very dismal number that we have of acreage per 1,000 inhabitants. I mean, our parks are so incredibly crowded already, and it's like it's only going to get worse as we build developments and housing in these other locations. It's only going to get much, much worse. So I'm just, trying to find a way that perhaps more people would understand the consequences for the future of our generations. I mean, even for those folks who don't really have a connection with nature, at least care about perhaps the children and our grandchildren as they're inheriting a land that is so incredibly nature deprived. So anyway, thank you for addressing this, and I hope you'll take that into consideration in your future meetings, because it is a very deep concern, as much as we don't want to look at it, because it's too painful to realize it's like, is our civilization really unraveling? I mean, it's a challenging conversation, but if we don't think local and act global, then, I mean, this is Santa Monica, right? If we can't do it here, it's, pretty much a lost case, I think, everywhere.
Well, I hope, please put those types of comments, right? Again, I'm going to keep plugging COMAP because that's the best way. So yes, obviously I'm hearing those and I understand, but those would be great comments to put into the COMAP.
Yes, I did. Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's go to Michael.
Great. Thanks, Amber. Appreciate you coming and giving us really great detail. You did mention about maybe taking up concrete and making a nature preserve. I actually think that would be a fabulous idea. There's a couple of projects going on right now in the Southland. Long Beach is adding 156 acres of new wetlands that easily could have been converted to something else, but they're making the move to do that. Newport Beach is adding 400 acres to create the Randall Preserve, and they had a benefactor, the Randall family, who gave $50 million to make that happen, and they prioritized that as something that they needed in their community. Irvine just bought the Gateway Preserve, 700 acres, in addition to their great park that they're completely rehabbing. So creating park space is something that many cities are doing, and it's something we haven't done here. My question is, when I was listening to you to talk, in scenario 1, you made no reference to nature as a guiding principle. In scenario 2, you did. You talked a bit at the both ends, rewilding that space. And in scenario 3, you made no mention again about nature. And guiding principles says start with nature. And so it seems that would be the beginning conversation for each one of these scenarios. And to create a restorative ecology is not just a little tiny bit of nature and a lot of playing fields or housing. It really needs space to live. So where in these scenarios does start with nature happen?
So in one, I think I started with it, right? On the West End is where it is rewilded, biodiversity, and increasing biohabitat. So I thought I said that, but maybe I did not. So we absolutely, and across all of them, right? There are large areas of what I think we show as dark green in all 3 scenarios. On the third option, let's see, where is that? I believe it's the West End. Not so much on the East End, but it's the West End that in general, right? There's a lot that show different versions of community gardens, right? And while that may be, right, is that immersive nature or is that more active use, right? Community use. But there's lots of different ways to connect with nature. But I believe all three of them have large areas that people could immerse themselves in nature, find those moments of inspiration, wonder, and awe. They move around, they look different, the shape is different, and what might be adjacent to them, I think, is different. Actually, in three, it's on that, it has event slots in three, so maybe I would have to double check. I'm looking at all of you right now.
Have you quantified, is there an acreage on what is being proposed for nature in all of these scenarios?
On the boards that are on the website that were presented at the community meeting, I believe there are a bunch of different metrics, and I believe it shows like nature preserve or others on there. I will double check that, but I'm pretty sure that they're on there.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Sam.
Hi. Okay, so I actually have a couple things. Let me just wrap my head around. Got to think about it real quick. I believe City Council needs to reinforce and strengthen the plans and policies already set forth by our city for generations to come. You know, it's kind of ironic we do land acknowledgements for our indigenous, and then here we are, you know, essentially like negating community input by like requesting to direct housing like by city council. Not only that, but like we have this ideology that like building housing near an incredibly busy street would like get people out of their cars. Like that's not going to happen. Like I'm a person that rides my scooter everywhere. I don't have a car, but my husband does. And you know, it's just we need better inclusionary housing if we really want to allow housing on these parcels of land. And with that being said, thank you.
Thank you. And that, you know, it is something that council is the one who's going to decide what goes forward. Our job as a project team is to hopefully provide a transparent, inclusive process where we are reaching out to as many Santa Monicans as we can, and then provide all of that information and data and sentiment and comments, such as meetings like this, so that they can make good choices.
Can I say one last thing? I had read also that there is a lack of Hispanic, Latino, and Black representation. Is there any ways we can increase participation in these underserved and misrepresented communities? Can we put more flyers around? You know, like I'm from the Pico neighborhood. I was pushed out. Actually, when I ran for city council, I was pushed out of the city, but my mom still lives in the city on 17th and Pico, where I was born and raised, and there's no flyers around. I mean, you know, I see nothing, and, you know, I feel like having maybe more posters planted up and things like that would generate more voices that are often left unheard.
We are trying, and I will say we any help, any suggestions, right? We've started forging relationships. We've now been a number of times before the Virginia Avenue Park Advisory Board, because that has been a great way. We counsel and reach out to Pico Neighborhood Association, so hopefully they are pushing the message out as well to folks in the Pico neighborhood. What we realized in the last month is we had hung banners and posters up in Virginia Avenue Park, and somebody keeps taking them down. And so I'm on like my third round of banners there, and I don't know if it's still up or not right now, but we are trying very concertedly to get information into places and spaces where people are. We've also noticed that Clover Park has come down for some reason, and I think Airport Park, we put a new one up, and I think it's still there. We've been working with our custodial staff and park staff to say, please don't take these things down. So we are trying, but if there is anything that you can help us do to augment and magnify and amplify the message and to get people out, right? It's why you see we have interpreters at all of our community meetings. We now have a separate link for our Spanish language community members. We are trying everything that we know how to, and we would love any support in furthering that message. And I'll keep trying on the banners, but I don't know what's happening.
Okay, thanks. Let's go to Alan. And just before you go, Alan, I just wanted to point out I'm called out in the chat, but Anne, I called out Anne. It's going to have the last question of the night. Sorry, Sean, but we have to cut it off somewhere. So
I'm gonna have to go at some point, but I know I talked a little long, so
yeah. And maybe Sean, if you want to put your question in the chat, that would be good. Okay, so let's go to Alan.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Amber, for the presentation, and I got a lot of good ideas, actually. One thing that I don't know if you've thought of or are thinking about, the Plan 1 is great, it's LC compliant, but why can't we weave some of the nice features that are in 2 and 3, like maybe the babbling brook or some of the winding paths, and put that into 1? I'm very kind of not surprised, but there's just a lot of housing there. And when we started LC, there was a statement that said the airport looks like an aircraft carrier surrounded by a sea of homes. We're already homes are woven into that airport already, even too much. And I'm certainly totally for affordable housing in this city, but that land is the only parkland that we have. So my question, I have two questions. Why are we not seriously talking about how to use the existing buildings and the money that we're making for the existing leases for revenue generation? It will involve less time, less money, and less infrastructure, and it's already there. So that's my question. Why isn't there more emphasis on creating the airport as its own entity, just like the airport's always been? The money that's made in the airport stays in the airport. Why isn't there more emphasis in that direction? And why are we looking to other new things that will require money to build and are not necessarily park features? Why are we going there?
So I would say, right, we are trying to meaningfully understand, and that's where providing a range of options for people to comment on. So to take the first part of your question, there's no reason why, right? Option 1, if like parts and pieces of option 1, right? We like saving the runway, we like the adaptive reuse better, those sorts of things. And then, but I like the circulation path from option 2 better, or option 3, or whatever it is. Right, that will then be the job of the city team, consultant team, going into that preferred scenario. So absolutely, please give us those comments in COMAP, because that's probably the easiest way for us to start to incorporate and understand what are the things that people really like and what are the things that people really don't like. We are right. It's also why in option A you see all of the adaptive reuse of the buildings that are currently there and those leases. So therefore that revenue to keep here, right? That is something that we are going to continue to advocate for. But that ultimately, right, that is a funding choice to do. I would say that's what it absolutely should be, right? Any current revenue that's under that airport fund, as soon as the airport goes away, it should stay and fund this space. And so we continue to advocate for that and say it in our presentation. So hopefully that came through tonight. As for looking at other uses, right, 1, we're directed to do it. So we don't get a choice on that one. When council says do a thing, we have to do a thing, right? That's what they told us to do. And trying to figure out, right, we see in so much of this conversation, even tonight, and just in general, right, it's housing and no housing, or park plus housing and Measure LC, make sure it closes. I don't want to deal with this anymore, right? So it's a really polarizing concept. And because we were directed to study some housing, what does that mean? Is there any level of consensus or not? Is it a timing thing? We want to just make sure it closes and then we can have this conversation, right? What are we actually saying? And so until we start to show people drawings, right? Because we spent a whole year just talking about words, and words matter and are very important, right? But that leads us into the plans. But when we start to look at plans, I feel like most people react more, I don't know if visceral is the right way, but there's a different type of reaction to a visual versus words on a page, right? You can, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? All those sorts of things. And so what we're trying to do is find where those edges are. What's too far, what's not far enough, what has support, what doesn't, and then what can we bring forward to a preferred scenario and then show how we can fund it and really bring together all of these pieces. And so that is the goal of the project. And hopefully we're doing a good job of it. We're trying, but we're gonna keep trying and keep trying to bring the information as we are hearing it, right? It's not for us to say, I have an opinion this way or that way, but it's to say, City Council, here is what we are hearing. Please tell us how to go forward.
We have heard for over 100 years that should be a park. And as you said, 11th hour last December, whatever, the housing people started to get, active, and it's trying to change the whole scenario of what's been happening for 100 years. And as much as we need housing, we need a park, and we need a sustainable place in our city and on our planet. And we don't have another opportunity, and this is it. So the democracy, this is a democratic club. This is not not like hopefully what we see in Washington, where it's respected what people voted for in the past, and you don't just change everything because a few people get an idea that this is the solution to fix this problem. We're conflating two things. So I hope we keep that in mind.
Absolutely. And thank you for the comments. Absolutely.
Okay, let's go to Claire.
Hi, Amber. Thanks very much for the presentation. And I just kind of want to echo Alan that we don't want to conflate the two things. I'm very much in favor of affordable housing. I want the people who work in the city to be able to live in the city and not have to do long commutes. My question veers often to this park is the southern end of the Sunset Park neighborhood. And if we do build all these housing, as some of the scenarios put forward, has there been consideration to the tremendous increase in traffic, the need for schools, for extra police and fire, all the other infrastructure that needs to go, and how that will affect our neighborhood? Whereas if we distribute the housing building as it is now throughout the city, that it is equally distributed among other neighborhoods.
Thank you. Yeah, so we are looking at, right, there's traffic and mitigation. I would say that's going to come on a lot more strongly as part of the EIR and CEQA, right? That's one of the big, excuse me, transportation and traffic studies. It's part of that, right? Level of service and all sorts of other things. And as we are looking at this piece of land, like someone else had mentioned, right, the whole population of Sunset Park is 7,500 folks right now. And so, if not that we got to unit counts or all, but I know there've been proposals for 3,000 units, let's say, right? That's 50% more than what Sunset Park is currently. And that is something to consider, right? And that's the type of thing that bringing forward to council to make decisions is we hope that you will all provide your feedback and discuss with them as you see the different council members around town what your concerns are, because they will be ultimately the ones making the decision. And so while we take that very seriously about trip generation and get people on the street, what is the connection to metro or bus or right, the Expo line. How are we increasing bike and ped action plans, right? There's a number of master plans that are part of the city currently that we want to make sure that we're also balancing how this project is envisioned. Because those are real comments and concerns, and there are long-range plans for a lot of things in the city. And so I don't think any of them actually contemplated the airport because it's always been kind of a barrier, right? You obviously can't drive or bike or anything across the runway for very real reasons. But as we look at what that connectivity is and should be, what those gateways are, right? Some of that's what you see in the layers survey of like, how do we want this to connect to our existing fabric of Santa Monica, as well as what are those implications? And so we'll be able to bring a lot more of that information in at that preferred scenario. There will be some of that additional information that comes in before council as part of July 8th. But we don't have those impacts yet.
And just one comment, I think that when you look at this, where the housing is situated and how far people would be, those housing units would not make them walkable to a grocery store or other local venues for the most part that much of the rest of the city is. And for lack of a better word, it sort of ghettoizes, especially along the southern border of the airport park, if it's put in there as it just looks disconnected from the rest of the city.
Thank you for the feedback. Definitely put that in COMAP. I'm just going to keep saying, yes, I will take those. I am making notes, but yeah, COMAP is going to be our best bet.
Thanks
on that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Here, let's go to Matt.
Thanks, John. And Amber, thanks for being here. You've got a difficult task of trying to make a lot of people happy or unhappy, one way or the other. My question involves something that I don't think we've talked about, at least tonight in the planning. So I'm interested to know if it's something that's being taken into consideration. After the recent wildfires, CAL FIRE came and spoke to many of our community organizations and discussed they had dozens of helicopter flights a day landing at Santa Monica Airport, flying their leadership and other equipment and utilities back and forth. And for those of us who live in the northernmost part of our city, it's hard to say, if we would have still had a northern part of our city, had they not had access to all those helicopter operations. CAL FIRE wasn't clear where they would have flown from exactly and how they would have adapted. But my question is, has that been taken into consideration in any of the three scenarios, that there would be an area for helicopters during wildfire season to be able to land and utilize? And if so, could you kind of go through just briefly which of those scenarios has prioritized that versus deprioritized it? And if not, is there a mechanism where you could be incorporating that or at least bringing that to the attention of council? Because I do think that's a relevant use of the space, regardless of whether it ends up being park or housing or both.
Sure. And this is where my understanding, right, for what a helicopter needs to land is about a 35-foot radius. And as I understand it, there are about 5 helicopters that were, my understanding, mostly positioned and ready to aid in the firefighting efforts. But most of the actual flights and dumping and coordinating was really more out of Van Nuys. It was when the wind shifted that then they needed some redundancy in that system so that they could continue with their operations. And so, as I understand it, right, a helicopter could land on a sports field, right? We've got to make sure the subbase is okay. They could land on a parking lot. They could land in a lot of different ways. And so for the resiliency strategy, right, mass distributions and storage of food and water or COTS or those sorts of things is where we're really focused on for the resiliency strategy across the 3 scenarios. But a helicopter certainly could land in any of those where we have those larger open spaces so that they're clear from trees and things like that. And so I think each of the scenarios as currently presented would suffice. But if there are things that you're seeing for specific, then that would be, again, another great thing to put into COMAP so that we make sure it gets captured.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. I'm hopeful you're right. And I would just suggest maybe CAL FIRE be consulted because they're the experts in this and what they need. I'm certainly not, but thank you for the consideration of that.
Sure. Yep.
Okay. Jean Paul.
Thank you, John. Amber and team, thank you very much. I know you've put a lot of work into this, and I really do appreciate you coming here. It was mentioned earlier that the highest and best use was not within the scope. Can that be added to the scope so the city actually knows what it has and its residents know what the highest and best use of this property is?
It's a pretty significant, we do not have the amount of contingency that it would take to do a study like that. So it's not something that without additional fund allocations that we can add into this project. So I guess the short answer is no, not right now. But if that's something that you would want to advocate for at the July 8th meeting, right? You can tell City Council anything that you want. And if they have that ability, I mean, I know we are in a very budget constrained environment right now, so I don't know if they would find money for that, if they can even. But certainly that's something that you could pose to them, and then they could make that decision.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, last question of the evening. Anne?
Oh, thanks so much, John. Thanks, everybody. Amber, you're a rock star. You're handling all these questions with grace and graciousness. I just have a few very quick ones to wrap up. The first topic is, what is the role for community input going forward? Because I know when we saw the 3 scenarios a few weeks ago, I think we all expected really to see whatever the layer survey data was reflected faithfully. And I understand, because you've explained it to us, you really wanted to lean in pretty far into what does some housing mean, but what that meant for the community and the community input is that the layers survey data wasn't fully reflected in those. We saw a lot more option C and option D, right, in scenario 2 and scenario 3, whereas in the layers data, it was mostly B preferences with A for housing and C for water. So I guess what's the community confidence level? What should that level be that COMAP will be reflected accurately and fully to council and out in the community? And do you see a role maybe for Sasaki drawing, a 4th scenario or a COMAP scenario that does reflect a composite of community input coming out of that survey?
Sure. I think, well, hopefully, right, we always try our best. And do we always get it right? Probably not, but we are at least trying our best. And the layer survey, we did take very seriously into account, right? But also balancing that with what council direction was, and how can we find where our edges are. And so hopefully you have confidence in the process and our efforts to be transparent, right? We are putting all of the information up onto the website as the reports so that people can dig in on things that they're considering and concerned about. And we will absolutely continue to do that. For COMAC specifically, what I imagine is that per scenario, we're going to start to see where there's a lot of green or thumbs up and where there are a lot of red or thumbs down. And so how we visually share that information, because, so at some point you're not going to be able to see the plan. But in COMAP, we can get into the very granular level. And so there will be some interpretation of this is what we heard in COMAP, but it will be for clarity's sake. And we intend on, just as we did in phases 1 and 2, to say, here is the quote unquote raw data, or the full report analysis PDF of everything that we heard. And then you can see how we interpreted it. And in what we're presenting to council, and then what they're basing decisions on. And so COMAP will absolutely be critical, because what these scenarios, again, right, we never expected folks to say, I like scenario 1 or 2 or 3, and then council says, great, I like number 2, so we're moving forward with 2. That is not the intent, right? So being mindful and intentional about what are the parts and pieces that work for you, or that you find support on, or that you want to see moved forward, will be absolutely taken very seriously and presented to council as what we've heard as part of 3A, so that they can make good decisions, right? My job, our job as a project team is really so that to provide council with the information so they can make good decisions. And we'll continue to try and prioritize that.
Yeah, so I just want to encourage you to do a visual at a COMAP because I think it would be a lot easier if there's something simple that then council can add onto. On that note, second quick question, what is HRNA's directive? Because again, the three scenarios leaned very heavily into revenue generation as sort of an assumption that that's the only way the park can be funded. And I know that you listed tonight and in the staff report on January 28th, all the other different funding sources. You know, for instance, in scenario one, you know, it shouldn't take the longest if you mount a parks bond, right? You remediate, you even mount a parks bond in November 2028, and boom, you're building a park pretty soon thereafter. So will HRNA explore all of those funding sources, or are we going to see mostly a revenue generation directive that they're responding to?
So it is, as long as it is self-sufficient, right? Their mandate is the three scenarios have to be self-sufficient. And when we see that there's a gap somewhere, how do we make up that gap? As you can imagine, financial analysis on three scenarios takes a while. And so that's why you're seeing an estimation or a general stack, right? I've hopefully provided a little bit more information tonight because they dig in to a lot of different ideas. But as for what specifically makes up any one given scenario, that we'll have a lot more information when we go to council with that. Because we just, the nature of time, we did not get deep financial analysis on the three scenarios, but we will have that for council with a lot more information. But as also we did the LOIs, which we have not had a chance to kind of really dig in and go deeply into. But we know that there are a lot of really good ideas, suggestions, and funding potential, let's call it, out there. And so we will continue to work with them, right? The group at HRNA that we're working with is a parks focused team. And so they have done this across the US. And so we're relying heavily on their prior experiences on what has been able to generate revenue, significant revenue, right? They're not going to go down to the level of like this restaurant does, you know, generates whatever revenue it does. It's more those big programmatic elements. And so the LOI information is being woven in as well as their experience. And we'll continue to talk about that as we go forward and certainly present it to council as a sort of a balanced picture.
Love it. Thank you, Amber. Last very quick question. So, you know, we've all been asking, really all of us have been referring to housing that's being built all over town. And then what's going to happen with the business park? Is that going to be housing? And so to what degree are you guys sort of keeping at the back of your mind, you know, where are we building affordable housing now? Like probably everyone knows the city is RFPing under this current housing element for, you know, turning Bergamot into affordable housing, turning 4th, 5th in Arizona, maybe the Main Street parking lot. So there are all these other moving parts in town where we are building housing, and this is kind of going to be our last big piece of public land after all of that goes. So how are you guys weaving it in together? And I guess I'd encourage you to look at the whole city as a living system and have what's happening elsewhere impact the final decision on the plan for the airport.
Sure, and it is a good point, and that's where we have, you know, regular communications with our planning team, right? They have not gotten the arena numbers, or they're not gearing up for the next cycle of the housing element or anything just yet, right? I think that's anticipated at the end of, it's either end of 26 or 27 when the next round of numbers should come down from the state. And so we absolutely work with them to understand what they are hearing and what they're planning for, and how these things come about. Where in the city could any of those numbers go, as well as our housing division from Housing and Human Services. And so what are they seeing? Where are things successful? Where are they not successful? Right. There's also what's it called? Fair Housing. I'm going to say Act, but that might not be the right last word.
Affirmatively furthering fair housing.
There we go. I was like, it's in there somewhere. So trying to understand what that is and what that means. And so again, we don't have those answers, but it is very much top of mind of how this piece of land is really important. And it is, I agree with so many of you have said, we only get one chance at this. And so what should this be to serve all of Santa Monica? But this also means that we have to think about all of Santa Monica and what is most beneficial to the most folks, right? And including nature's rights and all of the things that Santa Monica stands for, and the adopted plans across a wide range of things. And so it's not an easy answer, but we are, sorry, my voice is about to go out. So we will continue to do those things so that we can understand and bring that information before council as we understand it better. So that absolutely will be part of the conversation. We're just still, we don't have all of those data points yet.
Thank you so much. You're terrific.
Thank you, everyone. Hopefully we answered a bunch of questions.
Definitely did.
Gave some good information with more detail. So we appreciate the time tonight to be able to hear your concerns and be able to take those and do please use COMAP, because that's probably the easiest way, because then we do have data points to say, here's what we've been hearing. But just really appreciate all of the thoughtful comments and questions.
Well, thank you so much, Amber, for your time in responding to all these questions and the great presentation that you gave earlier. We're really glad that we're able to be part of the Warming Up Act as you get ready to do the full Ginsburg on 10 boards and commissions. I don't know, has that ever been done before? 10? That might be a new Santa Monica record. We'll have to check at the History Museum. But
we're
anyway,
doing a lot of firsts on this one. We're trying a lot of things to, get the message out as widely as possible, but we can always do better.
Well, so thank you and your team so much for being here. Good luck in the days to come with this. Also wanted to thank, I saw in the participants list, of Mayor Negrete and Mayor Pro Tem Terosas and Councilmember Hall and all of our other boards and commissioners who are here tonight. And I saw some former mayors on the list. So everybody is so engaged and excited to be part of this process. So thank you everybody for being here. To our club's Ad Hoc Airport Commission, we're going to have our next meeting on June 18th, 1 week before our membership meeting. So we'll get our heads together about what we're going to recommend to the membership. And then on June 25th, that's the one that everybody has been registering to the Democratic Club to become a member. We're so glad to have all the new memberships, and we're going to be taking a vote that night to be able to tell the city council what our position is on all of this and how we want to use our lobbying and advocacy efforts as a club to support. So anyway, thank you to everybody for being here, especially Amber. We're really grateful, and we're looking forward to continuing the process. And to everybody out there watching on YouTube later on, be sure to come live June 25th. It's going to be at the Church in Ocean Park, 235 Hill Street, and also on Zoom. You can sign up on our website to be on the mailing list, and you can find out about all of our upcoming events. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Night.
Thanks, John.
See you later.